Form up. Group up with me.
Reaper has been misunderstood in just about every season of competitive Overwatch, so it's about time that Edgelords unite and clear our name, because Reaper is not a bad pick in 2017. In this video, I'm going to talk specifically on how to succeed with Reaper in the current meta, because this does kind of change from season to season with major patch differences into play. And we'll also talk a little bit about misconceptions and I think some misinformation about Reaper and where he stands, what he's supposed to be doing, what he's even good at. A lot of the community doesn't seem to really have a grip on what this is, and I don't think there's a lot of good Reaper players out there that are enforcing this and teaching everybody by raising hell with Hellfire shotguns to their face, because if they were losing to Reaper more often, they might realize what he can do. And I do think he is quite good, just not meta-defining like some other characters might be. But thankfully right now we're in what I would call the golden age meta, in that you can get a lot of different things to work, far more than you could in any other meta to date. And because of that, even if a hero can be deemed underpowered by the community's concerns, I think just about every hero you can make a case for to have some playability. But I think Reaper's is even beyond that minimal expectation. I think he's all the way up to being good in the right hands if you know how to play him. So I want to try to teach you guys how to do that in this balanced patch climate. I will link you to two other Reaper videos we've done in the past, because I think they're key and useful to understanding how Reaper plays. I did a pro breakdown of Harry Hook playing Reaper and his lurk and pounce play style, which we'll elaborate on in today's video in matchmaking games. Also in that video I discuss how to properly aim his weapon, which we won't cover today, and how to set up insta-kill shots. The Too Long Didn't Read version is barrel stuff your enemy to deal maximum damage, but you can watch that video for a further explanation. And also, Reaper versus Tanks Misconceptions meta discussion video. In that video, I broke down more in depth the misunderstandings of how Reaper didn't work, quote unquote, against multi-tank. And it wasn't so much that Reaper wasn't good against multi-tank, it was that Reaper was played incorrectly against multi-tank, but more importantly is that Reaper's not good against a death ball. If the enemy team is playing coordinated in a shoulder-to-shoulder play style, Reaper isn't going to quote-unquote tank bust through all of that. If you're looking for a tank buster, instead I would suggest Bastion, Junkrat, things that from range can output tons of damage and create a threat that requires diving to be countered. So if the enemy team is playing really slow and together, you can play characters like Bastion, Junkrat, Symmetra, and spam towards them. I would more so call those characters tank busters, or at the very least, death ball busters. Reaper is not that, and I wouldn't even call him a tank buster either per se, because I think it's misleading to what your goal when on the battlefield is. I don't want you to just seek and destroy tanks necessarily. Instead, I think it's far more useful to think of Reaper as a close-range duelist, because that's what he actually is. Every character in the game is afraid of Reaper in close range. If you get Reaper in the positioning that he wants, there isn't anybody that's really happy about walking into that fight. You might be afraid of Flashbang or Hook, but you have Wraith form to bait it out or dodge it, but also it's not too hard to navigate through the map to make those abilities difficult to use. So once we remove the idea of tank busting from our minds and instead think of ourselves as a duelist, our target prioritization goes towards the biggest threats on the battlefield. Now I'm going to break down some clips in a second, but one last philosophical point about this Reaper pick before we go on to that. I think this is a good test that you can make for yourself when trying to evaluate whether a hero was a valuable pick or not. And this goes for DPS picks at least, which are the most controversial, I think, of all heroes in the game when you're trying to build a team comp. But here's the test. Ask yourself this. When you make a play with a DPS hero early in a fight to swing it, to take out the biggest threat on the enemy team, Could you have done that easier on a different hero? And also, I think it's important to remember your own personal skill set. Because in theory, in a vacuum, you could say, well, if Widowmaker never missed a headshot, then yeah, that doesn't count, right? Nobody never misses. You have to live in reality of what's possible with what you can do as a player or what players can do in general. And this scales up the skill set curve all the way from bronze to the best pros. Now, to that degree, at the very high level, I can see why you would pick Tracer over Reaper. If you're Soon, you probably just play Tracer because he can do on Tracer things that Reaper can't do, and probably is going to get the same amount of damage output, same amount of dueling capability, and all of that. But if you're not Soon, is there a point where you could get your Reaper to do things that are similar in significance in the team fight, but require less skill, even if there is a strict cutoff of your skill ceiling, because obviously Reaper just has less tools available to him. And I think that's the case. And I hope from watching the gameplay that you can see what I mean when I say this. Let's break down some examples of how we can set ourselves up to do something that Reaper can do that other characters just can't right now. Or at the very least, not as quickly, not as reliably, or not as easily, which I think is very important. Throughout a lot of the ranks, if you find yourself struggling on some of the harder DPS heroes, don't listen to what the entire community says about Reaper being bad. In lots of levels of matchmaking, Reaper can be very good, because I'm sure a lot of people watching this video that maybe don't have the mechanical skill set to play Widowmaker, Genji, whatever, can emulate some of these plays that I pull off on Reaper, because it doesn't take some incredible skill set to do so. Now, opening fights on King of the Hill are incredibly important. You have to win them quick, because if you gain control, the enemy team's at a massive disadvantage. As we come around this corner, I'm trying to follow my Winston player. Very key that is Reaper, you play with your tank. I see Soldier across the way, very easily could delete me from this range, but I use the map geometry to hide behind the pillar so that when I turn to aggress onto him, he has a very small window of time to shoot me at all. Not to mention the fact my Winston player is good, dives the hit scan, we focus fire together, and we win this 2v2 hands down easily. And that's one cool thing about Reaper. He's one of the best 2v2 duelists in the game as well, because if he has a tank setting him up, he just gets free damage. Once again, just about the same exact play. As I come around the corner, Winston's popped his bubble to create a lot of space for me. This buys me some time to make a decision about where I want to go without dying immediately. I find their biggest threat and I take him out quick. DPS duels in Overwatch matter for a big percentage of whether your team fight is a win or a loss. If you're able to neutralize the enemy team's DPS, either through smart tank play, say like a D.Va, countering them, eating up what they can do, or if you just straight out win a DPS duel, the enemy team's going to be at a massive disadvantage. This is an important lesson about target prioritization that I think the community needs to learn. Target prioritization has changed significantly from meta to meta, and though I could do an entire video about the history of that, it doesn't apply to today, so I'm going to skip over that. And if you have learned something that even I taught you, or you've picked up from other metas, realize that that stuff is old now and doesn't apply. The best way to target prioritize in Overwatch right now is to eliminate the biggest threat first. Now, typically that is their main damage dealer, but sometimes it'll be an ultimate. So to that extent, Lucio oftentimes is a very low priority target. Unless he has Sound Barrier, which can swing a fight, then he probably might be the first thing you target, especially if you have like Genji Blade, and they're gonna get this big announcement when a big ult fight's coming. A lot of times in pro games, whether the Genji Blade completely eliminates the enemy team or gets nothing, has to do with whether they are able to kill the Lucio first or not. So with that out of the way, it's important to note that as Reaper, if you're able to get in close on the enemy's DPS character or their biggest threat, whatever that is, and delete them early in the fight, you can undoubtedly justify the Reaper pick. Now, I've got a couple more clips to break down that will be showing two more aspects of Reaper. This first one's about commanding space, and it's important to note that this is something that a Roadhog can't do, because a lot of people say that you might as well just play Roadhog if you're playing Reaper, but the funny thing is, Roadhog is a tank buster. He's more similar to those other characters that I mentioned, who can stand in your own death ball and spam towards the enemy team's tanks, than Reaper is. Reaper is a close-range duelist. Big difference there. Duelists instead want to be lurking around and trying to set up a duel, whereas a tank buster is something that spams damage constantly. At least in my estimation, and I think that's the best way to categorize them, because that's kind of what Roadhog does a lot of the time. Let's watch this other opening fight on Li Zhang. Again, I'm trying to make sure that I utilize my tanks to not take any damage, and I find myself into this close range area, and all I want to do here is bait the enemy team to try to fight me indoors. Now keep in mind, I've already been smacking this team with my Reaper play, so they're afraid to do so. I'm able to keep them at bay and bide my time, and then when I feel like I'm overwhelmed and I don't have teammate support, I Wraith form away, but I'm constantly a close range threat. It's terrifying for them to try to come around this corner, and if they do so without the proper coordination, they get bopped in the face immediately. And it's this playstyle that I think is so underrated about what Reaper can do. If you're playing against Dive Comp, for instance, which has like Tracer, Genji, Winston, if you're able to set up your team and your Reaper, namely, in spots like these that are really strong, where you can avoid the open space fights and instead lure them into your Reaper fights, Reaper can carry team fights. Now the question of the matter is, does Reaper have the tools in order to get himself in those places? I will say it's difficult to do without really good tank play, but once you have that little bit of coordination with your tanks, he's really opened up as a threat on the battlefield. As far as Reaper balance is concerned, I would put him in the category of like McCree, Pharah, Junkrat, characters that could use a small change, plus or minus, but I don't think are in a terrible spot for the health of the game. I'm fine with Reaper in the niche pick category, because I think it's important to note that a lot of players aren't playing him in the way I'm describing. Instead of using him to set up to get his strong duels, they're playing him, I would call, badly, and then esteeming the character to be not worth anything, but I think there is great value in Reaper as a pick. Now, the last bit of gameplay that we're going to break down here is actually me playing in a 6-stack, which I don't do very often anymore, since that the matchmaking system basically immediately removes SR for you even to attempt to do so. But we are playing against another 6-stack, which made for a very interesting game. Now, it's important to note that this enemy team is running a tank combination that I deem terrible. Quite bad. Zarya Hog and King of the Hill, because so many players play matchmaking in this deathmatchy style, gets picked all the time. But I'll tell you right now, the easiest way to counter this is to have a decent shielding tank and a Reaper pick. If Reaper has any space whatsoever to get in on that enemy team, the only threat he has is Hook, which isn't too hard to dodge in my opinion. And as long as you dodge that, you get in close on any of these characters, you're going to delete them, as I show here in this footage. Also on note, they also are running Tracer and Genji, which I don't really feel like I struggle to deal with as long as Reaper gets in the spots he wants to be in. If I find myself forcing them to fight into me, or taking close range duels in a side room or something like that, Reaper can be a terror for them and just very slippery, and command space in a way that this enemy team just couldn't deal with at all. If an enemy team runs this Zarya Hog thing on you ever, I suggest that you get a teammate to run either Winston or Reinhardt, whatever somebody can run, and use that barrier to get yourself into close range, and you will melt those characters. Not to mention the hit scans, which are also very squishy against Reaper as well. In his effective range, there is no character that wants to 1v1 him. Remember that, and use that to your advantage. Could Reaper use a buff? I wouldn't mind, sure. For one, I think it'd be cool if they played around with the sound cues like they did with Sombra, so that he could teleport to positions without screaming out loud, "Enemy team, I'm behind you, turn around." I think that would be good, but really he's not a flanker necessarily because he is so slow. Instead, he'll always be best in this duelist playstyle, and that's how you're going to want to be using him. It isn't about the amount of damage that he can do, it's the speed of his time to kill. Those are two different ideas. Soldier can deal more damage, quote unquote, but Reaper can win a duel faster, which is an important distinction between deciding whether to pick Reaper or Soldier. In a lot of cases, you might want to have both anyway, but it's important to know the difference because Soldier is less of a duelist than Reaper is. So who does Reaper counter in this meta, and who do you want to look out to not play Reaper into? First misconception is that he's bad against Roadhog and Soldier. Neither is really true. Soldier wants to zone and deal tons of damage from afar. If you get in close on him, he does not want to fight you there. You can shoot him through his healing pack, and if he doesn't have Helix up, he's gonna really struggle to kill you faster than you can easily kill him. Same thing with Roadhog. If his hook is down, he's a free kill, and be sure to aim your shotgun spread so that the top end of it is at his head, but the rest of it is hitting his body so that no pellets are wasted. Otherwise, characters that supposedly counter him, McCree has a flashbang, but at the same time, just like Roadhog, you can still delete him. Tracer and Genji I already spoke about. The nice thing about dueling them is that they are characters that want to get in close. Genji wants to do his alternate fire shurikens because it's this really fast time to kill. He's going to be swift striking through your team. Tracer, kind of similar. If they're able to distance themselves from you, you'll start to feel that they have the advantage, but remember, the entire premise of our playstyle is just commanding the space we want. We don't fight those characters out in the open where they want to fight. We utilize our tanks to get ourselves in the places we want, and then we have either an advantage or at the very least a fair fight. Now, Reaper against entrenched, ranged characters like Widow, Hanzo, Bastion, Junkrat, all of that success is going to be based upon your ability to get in close on them. And it will really depend on how their team plays around them. If they're forcing you into an open fight and you're not able to utilize your tanking to get in close and delete things from extreme close range, then Reaper looks pretty bad. Also, of course, he can't shoot Pharah really, but like I mentioned in my How Pros Counter Pharah video, you can deem him a way to win the ground battle faster. And once you do that, if say you infiltrate the enemy lines and you delete one or two things, well, if they have pharmacy in the air, eventually that bird's gonna have to land and touch the objective once in a while. So especially if you're playing a map where the objective's indoors, there's certain stages of certain maps where you could feel like there's little she's going to be able to do. So just look out for maps with low ceilings, like the end of Route 66 is pretty small and hectic, hard for Pharah to really get around while you're closing in on the objective. Plus, she doesn't really want to be on the cart. That's one thing that I do with Reaper oftentimes. If I already used my ultimate and I was playing a different DPS class and they were trying to combat that and they were used to how that was going, you can pull out a surprise Reaper pick, which they might not see coming at all anyway, or remember how to even deal with them, and forget how good Reaper is at dueling on the cart. What happens in those stall fights, guys? Whether you're talking about 2CP or finishing out a payload map, there's a lot of trading going on, there's a lot of jumping around, characters are trying to dodge you. If you're playing a character that is a little bit more difficult to play, and you're missing shots, every single miss is another respawn that's coming out from the enemy team. So, Reaper, reliable damage, up close, wants to be up close anyway, can pick up orbs to heal himself when your healers might go down. He's really good at sustaining and closing out a fight like that. Also, since he can teleport, when you're in those hectic fights, you might think to swap to him because he has a pretty quick run back from spawn, actually, thanks to his E ability that you never use otherwise. Or anyway, it's hard to use against players that are aware of it. That's the long and short of it, guys. It's about utilizing the map geometry or the space your tanks make to get to where you want. And once you're there, you're pretty much golden. He's not the best at dealing against a bunch of barriers. So if your opponent is doing some sort of multi-barrier spam defense, say like King's Row Street, sometimes you see this, Orisa, Symmetra, Reinhardt, multi-barrier. If he can flank it, it's okay. If you're forced to fight it head up, probably not going to be that great. But at the end of the day, the number one reason why you choose to or not to pick Reaper should be based upon your ability to duel the key targets. And since oftentimes there's a hit scan out there, if you hunt that guy down, the rest of your team is going to have a sigh of relief. Same thing with Roadhog, which will terrorize teams, and it's one of the hardest characters to deal with. Now, I know there was a lot of information packed in this video, and not as much play-by-play as I would like to do. From this point, I'd like to know what your questions are about Reaper, and I think it might even work better to get more specific in maybe a coaching video or in future videos, because each one of these little aspects could probably devote an entire video to the idea in order for me to fully explain it right. For instance, maybe you struggle at dueling with Roadhog. For me, I stay in spots make it hard for me to hook, jiggle in and around corners, pop them in the head otherwise, and as soon as this hook's down, I win. But if the entire community feels like Roadhog counters Reaper, which I think is the opposite of the case, then maybe this is something that I need to dive into more deeply, and especially if you yourself feel like you're always getting hooked by Roadhog and can't do anything about it, send in a gameplay to youroverwatchplays@gmail.com, and maybe I'll review it for a Coach FREEDO segment. Other than that, guys, I don't know what to say. Reaper is sick, at least when I play him, I think. I never get to pick him because everyone thinks he's a throw pick nowadays. But with my 4 hours with him on Season 4, I have a 63% win rate. So just saying, he's like my best DPS character. I know he's easy, but I think part of it is the novel factor that nobody really plays Reaper nowadays. Everyone assumes he's bad. But also I think I must have some unique approach to the character that is surprising people. And I think it stems from disciplined positioning and careful aim. Guys, let me know what you think about this Reaper situation in Season 4. I hope the video was helpful and maybe unlocked some DPS potential in those of you who struggle to find a DPS to pick nowadays. Reaper's mechanical skill set is lower than many other heroes, meaning that if you have the game sense to play him properly and find the duels you want, you'll probably find that you'll have more success with Reaper than you will struggling on another hero that's harder to play, if you're more of a game sense above mechanics type player like I am. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button. It really does help us out and lets us know that you're enjoying the content. We love to hear it. If you did indeed enjoy, be sure to hit subscribe, and you're gonna wanna hit the bell icon so that you stay notified when our videos go live. Do not miss a Your Overwatch upload. Join the notification squad. Linked in the description, you can check out our Twitch page, our Discord server, and our Twitter, where we tweet out updates, cool clips, and interact with you guys about the game of Overwatch. That's been it for me. I've been FREEDO for Your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.